in a week, where fitness YouTubers transformed into medical experts, critiquing a tainted injection into a leg. I took a different path and started stalking Alan Roberts' comment section. Now I know what you're thinking, that sounds weird, James, but I assure you, the voice in my head says it's fine. That was a joke. And so Alan recently made a video about somatotypes and Michael J. White and this body typing issue, and I've already made a video about that, so please watch that, where I do explain that there are some legitimate body typing aspects to programming training. However, that somatotypes are not particularly useful for you as a way of categorizing body composition. Introducing the new somatotype spectrum by James Linker, the dry muscleomorph, the it was just a social experimentomorph, and Vincent. And so in the comment sections, quite a few people commented, well, look at Christian Bale. He's been, an ectomorph, a mesomorph, and an endomorph. Now, we don't need to get into the use of chemicals in this, but we can see various examples of people. David Goggins is another guy who you could categorize as different somatotypes at different points of time. They are snapshots of a person's body composition at a specific point in time. And more specifically, somatotypes really just look at muscle mass and body fat. They don't capture many other aspects. I'm going to try and frame this question and concept differently for you to try and help you as a way of approaching fitness ideas. And the key word is significance. And so let's assume that somatotypes are accepted. It wouldn't matter in what I'm about to say in this video, because this idea of how significant are they to the programming of your training is really something that I want you to think about. But a very brief background on somatotypes, developed by William Sheldon in the 1940s, and he was a psychologist, and their application was for psychology, to look at people's body composition and therefore project a psychological trait, such as these types of people are more timid, or these types of people are more aggressive. There is actually a 7-point scale that's been developed for somatotypes. But these 3 categories essentially said that the lean and long-limbed ectomorphs were cerebral, anxious, solitary, and secretive. The broad-shouldered and muscular mesomorphs were risk-taking, and the endomorphs were more jolly and affectionate. The fat people were more jolly. If that's not exact science, then what is? In addition, the research was quite observational in nature, meaning that they were eyeballing photographs to come to this model. And so there are many problems with somatotypes, but let's just assume that somatotypes are fine. Some of you watching this may stick by somatotypes. It doesn't really matter, because what we need to understand is what are your priorities and what is significant when you are programming your training according to your body. But actually what you'll find out is it's actually according to your goals, and that does relate to your body composition. But that's where many people get confused. And so there are legitimate body typing ideas that you can think about, such as muscle fiber dominance, limb length, insertion points, attachment points, bone density. There are several things which will affect how you perform a compound lift specifically, and these ergonomics are a factor. However, somatotypes are too simplistic a model to capture how nuanced these various differences are in relation to our bodies. And in addition, this kind of myth that endomorphs have a slow metabolism, so they struggle to lose fat, whereas ectomorphs or mesomorphs can lose fat more easily. Well, actually, an endomorph, by this depiction, somebody who has a large percentage of body fat, would have a faster metabolism than if they were a leaner state of themselves. Because as you put on more body fat, assuming that muscle mass is maintained, although how much impact muscle mass has is, I will make a video on that for caloric burn. Your body will store more fat, but the adaptation to that is an increased metabolic rate to create this new energy balance. And I have made a video on that. So larger people actually have a faster metabolism, not a slower metabolism. And so that's again a massive hole in this endomorphs can't lose fat easily. Get in caloric deficit over time with good resistance training and quality nutrients, and they will lose fat. But people get confused because they say, well, would your genetics do matter in terms of programming or training? Absolutely they do, but somatotypes are not the answer. But let's assume that you want to follow somatotypes. Actually, a lot of the videos I've seen on this on YouTube, they're talking about goals, not somatotypes. For example, Lee Hayward, he puts somatotypes and he says an endomorph needs to lose fat, therefore they have to do X, Y, and Z. A mesomorph is going to maintain, for example, they have to do X, Y, and Z. An ectomorph wants to build muscle, so they have to do X, Y, and Z. Now that's actually just different goals. and that is extremely misleading. If you actually want to use a somatotype model, you would have to try and decrease the amount of variables and make it a more balanced argument. For example, you would take all 3 somatotypes and you would program the same goal. For example, muscle building, increasing muscle mass, which is a very good goal for pretty much all people. And then you would say, well, what are the differences in programming training? And I would love to know what these people who promote somatotypes feel are the intricate differences in training, because at the end of the day, a bicep curl is a bicep curl.
1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi.
Whether or not you are an ectomorph or a mesomorph. So I'd love to know those differences. However, let's say that muscle building is our goal. The same scientific principles that underlie muscle building would be in training for the ectomorph, the endomorph, and the mesomorph. And these would be progressive overload and mechanical tension, exercise selection to work all muscle groups, a caloric surplus, the energy balance and adequate protein needed to help with the response, and then adherence to this training plan over time. The progressive overload, the specificity, and the mechanical tension being the key training aspects that underlie all training for all 3 somatotypes. And for fat loss, these would be a caloric deficit, adequate protein to maintain muscle mass, adherence to your eating plan over time. Whatever eating plan psychologically puts you into caloric deficit over time is a good idea for you. Resistance training to maintain as much muscle mass as possible, because muscle mass is active tissue, and then other forms of exercise to help to create that caloric deficit. Actually, the same core principles in science would be used regardless of your body type. And actually, the somatotype model is so oversimplified that it does not incorporate aspects such as attachment points. And so I hope you're starting to see just how insignificant somatotypes would be, and how this contrasts to certain people who will say that you have to undertake their body type quiz before you can start training. And in my opinion, this is just a way of absolving people of the responsibility that they haven't achieved their goal, specifically aimed at beginners who can say, well, this guy looks good, he has loads of followers, and he's telling me that it's my body type which is the issue, that I need to train for that. I didn't know anything about that, so that must be the reason why I'm not being successful. And he's given me a clear solution, so I can understand why people would fall into that trap. And in addition, you would look at something like a beginner to advanced lifter spectrum for how you would lift, not just body type. A beginner would perhaps focus more on the basics of lifting, whereas a more advanced lifter would have to use more progressive overload tools to help to create adaptation. That's just one example of how people may train differently, which is associated with something that is not body typing at all. And if you're one of these people that says, well, I'm skinny, I'm an ectomorph, and I struggle to put on muscle, you really have to look at what you're doing. Now, you may not put on huge slabs of muscle, but if you're not increasing muscle mass, you're most likely doing things wrong, or you're not consistent, or a mixture of the both. And a lot of people miscalculate calories. They think they're effectively training with intensity when they're not. They think they're being consistent when they're not. And they think they're working the muscles in a range of angles, etc., which they are not. And so when it comes to concepts such as this, which real fitness professionals, in my opinion, think about, it's not so much how do we lose fat or how do we build muscle. That is fairly well established. Although it is nuanced, it is fairly well understood, the main building blocks of those concepts. It's more, how do you adhere to something? It's more of a philosophical debate in many ways. And so if you are an ectomorph looking to build muscle, or if you are a mesomorph or an endomorph looking to build muscle, and let's say you're bench pressing 3 sets of 8, why would your body typing specifically affect your programming for the bench press? All of these people are going to use progressive overload. They're all going to be working on mechanical tension and muscle damage and metabolic stress and all these factors. They're all going to be used control repetition with good form. Now, their exact grip on the bar, their exact mechanics may be slightly different depending on limb length, but the scientific parameters behind training that exercise for muscle growth are the same. Body typing is not significant in this aspect. But of course there is an element of trial and error and experimentation in your training. I always say it's always important to plan for you, but don't be confused by these broad generic categories which do not capture how complicated and nuanced the body is. And when it comes to science, you have to understand what is useful in terms of research and what is less useful. And here's a kind of diagram, a pyramid for you. And anecdotal information, this is what worked for me. This opinion is bottom of the pyramid. The meta-analysis and the randomized control studies, these are really far more useful when we're looking to understand a topic and communicate it to other people. When you get anything like this thrown at you, think about how significant it is. And the litmus test is, what are the basic underlying principles, scientific principles of muscle building and fat loss? And how significant is this concept or any other concept in terms of adjusting or altering it? So I'm James Linker, Shredded Sports Science. I'll see you soon.